Hello fellow YouTube viewers, for this video I'm doing something different. I'm going to review the first season of one of my favourite TV shows of all time, that is The Simpsons. And you may see me review some of the next seasons in some of my next videos. The first season originally aired in 1989 and 1990 after its success with the Tracy Ullman Show, and you can just about imagine the impact this show has had since this season's running. I shall be ranking the episodes of season 1 from worst to best. It sounds debatable, especially considering the admiration many of us have had on the classic era, and that most of the weakest episodes come from the modern era. But even during this era, I think there are some episodes better than others. So I shall kickstart with my least favourite episode from season 1. Number 13, Moaning Lisa. Even though I don't dislike any of the episodes from this season, Moaning Lisa has a few problems which made me rank this one the lowest. I understand that this is the season's only episode that centres mostly on Lisa, and I do think she's a great role model to viewers. You can guess from the title what the episode is about. Yes, Lisa is moping about. It would have helped if there was something in particular that was troubling Lisa, but here she's just miserable for no particular reason, and it kind of makes the episode drag. There are some great things in Moaning Lisa though, and this includes the scenes with Bleeding Gums Murphy in it, i.e. his saxophone jam with Lisa, and of course that really cool B-plot where Homer is struggling to beat Bart at a video game. Number 12. There's No Disgrace Like Home. There's No Disgrace Like Home was the first episode I ever saw as a kid. It first aired on BBC Two when I was about 6. Of course, many of us have known for some time that the titular family is an example of a dysfunctional family. I sometimes wonder whether this episode should have been the one to be aired first, because of what has become a recurring theme. However, there are some elements that made me rank this episode quite low. Firstly, have you noticed how Lisa behaves? Sure, the scrapes she has with Bart are typical, and she sometimes has bad habits, i.e. during the dinner scene, but I refer to when she confuses wrestling with boxing. I understand combat sports may not be her scene, but for someone who's intelligent and has an IQ of somewhat over 140, well, definitely over my IQ, which is roughly 142, was when I last checked. As for Homer, he seems unusually smart in this episode and less of an oaf, but I guess I'm overanalyzing. After all, this is the first season, and there are bits that are over with too quickly, i.e. the transition from the Simpsons leaving the company picnic to the TV dinner bit, in which everything seems refreshed. But still, not a bad episode. Oh, and kudos for the animation on the jellies. Number 11. Homer's Night Out. I want to rank Homer's Night Out higher on the list, I really do. It does have some incredibly funny moments, i.e. that argument Bart has with the male lady, or the female man as he calls her. Oh, and the moments with the spy camera are awesome. It always cracks me a smile when Bart takes a picture of his arse. I also love the scene with the stag party Homer goes to, how he behaves rudely to the waiter, how socially awkward the groom-to-be is. Oh, and for some reason I think Homer and his mate's rendition of Barnacle Bill the Sailor is lovely. I do have some mixed feelings about the sequence in which the picture of Homer dancing with Princess Kashmir goes viral. I mean, it's typical of kids to make a fuss over a photo, but when the parents get involved it's a bit much. And it leads to the first events in many episodes where Marge chucks Homer out. Again, that's a bit much. But what I do love about this episode is the message and how Homer informs the public on the important contribution women have made since civilization. The Simpsons ain't exactly an educational show, but there's nothing wrong with the occasional message. Number 10. The Crepes of Wrath. The Crepes of Wrath is the first episode where we see the family travelling abroad. Well, technically it's just Bart that's going to France. and it does make for a good synopsis. Bart participates in the foreign exchange program after dumping a miniature bomb into the lavatories. As explained, his program takes place in France. Elsewhere, the rest of the family receive a visit from an Albanian lad named Adil. While they have a good time, Bart experiences the opposite, and we do feel sorry for him considering the lack of proper food and comfort he's getting from the two guys. It goes to show how hard it can be to cope with being in a non-English speaking country. It's a bit of a smile jerker when Bart finally speaks fluent French, but we are relieved that he eventually receives his justice. As for the B plot in which Adil turns out to be a spy, let's say it is a rather strange one. Oh, and I must mention the first appearances of Skinner's Mom Agnes. It's a fantastic debut, and I do sometimes wonder why she stopped calling Seymour Spanky. Number 9. Life on the Fast Lane. Not a lot to say about this episode. Life in the Fast Lane does really define Homer and Marge's relationship. Marge is a dedicated family woman, if a little too dedicated, and a loving one too. Homer does have a good heart too, but doesn't always think of others, and in fact does end up making mistakes. And the birthday present he gives to Marge proves to be the icing on the cake. It's only after when Marge decides to make use of her new bowling ball that causes Homer to really worry about her. And it's when Marge's new bowling instructor, Jacques, advances on her, when Marge eventually thinks about Homer. And I think Jacques is an amazing character, even though we only got to know him in just the one episode. Yes, he's had cameos, but the point is he has character. He obviously fancies Marge, but I get the feeling that he wants much more than that. But it's good that Marge does get back with Homer, because it wouldn't be the Simpsons if they were split up permanently. I know the ending is a film parody, but I was still emotional watching it. Number 8. Some Enchanted Evening. As most of us know, Some Enchanted Evening was the first Simpsons episode to be produced, and therefore was originally going to be the one to air first. But James L. Brooks was pretty annoyed with the result, and so Matt Groening started production on the next episode, which I'll get to later. I guess it would have made sense for it to be the first episode to air considering the animation and the fact that this is an episode which unites the titular family together despite their troubles. In fact, this episode's pretty unique. I can't think of one TV episode or film in which some kids are hunted by a babysitter. At the end, we know that despite their dysfunctionality, they do truly love each other. One key moment is when Marge is waiting for Homer to return and staring at the door in a very threatening manner. Added to that, she even briefly takes her anger out on the kids, which had me opening my eyes wide open. She then cools when she sees that Homer has brought her a treat. In addition, they're not the highest earning family considering how cheap Homer's present to Marge was. And as for the kids and the babysitter, I'll talk a bit about Maggie. She may only be a baby, but she does have a resourceful side, and quite an intelligent one too, considering how she manages to get out of her crib with a hanging toy. And my god, how intense the scenes with Mitt's bots are. I personally would have liked to have seen her in more episodes, but oh well. I'm going to go on too much about this episode. I can see why people don't like this. I can see why some people don't like this one much, usually due to the animation, but like, come on, let's give the storyline credit. Number 7, Barts the Genius. And here is the episode that was produced following James L. Brooks' dissatisfaction with Some Enchanted Evening. And Bart the Genius apparently made him feel better. Of course, I do like this episode a little bit better than the former. Around this season, most of the episodes focused on Bart, and by the end of Bart the Genius, we know for the first time that he's mischievous and struggles a lot in school. Hell, his low intelligence and class clown antics are enough to wind the teachers up. He does have a circle of friends and doesn't want to lose them, hence why he doesn't fit in with the new school he's transferred to after cheating on an exam. He slowly attempts to understand a joke that his advanced teacher tells to the class. Next moment, when he briefly visits Milhouse and them other two mates, they dismiss him as Poindexter. We know he's not really a nerd, and that he does hate being a failure all the time. Apart from that, not a lot to say, except that I'll never get over the Quidjabo joke. Number 6. Simpsons roasting on an open fire. As I said before, I sometimes wonder if maybe there's no Disgrace like home or Some Enchanted Evening should have been the pilot episode. I mean, Simpsons roasting on an open fire, it's a Christmas special. But nevertheless, it's an awesome first episode. It introduces our 5 main characters all together. First, we meet Homer, Marge and Maggie as they arrive at the school to see their other kids perform their pageant. And then Lisa through an unusual dance she gives. And then Bart singing in the school choir his unforgettable rendition of Jingle Bells Batman Smells. We're also introduced to a number of side characters we've grown to love today. Skinner, Mr. Burns, Smithers, Flanders, Milhouse, Moe, Barney, and even Ralph Wiggum. And of course, some of the extended Simpsons family. Not many sitcom Xmas specials are that great. I, of course, included the Christmas specials of Absolutely Fabulous, which I found forgettable, and the ones of the royal family, which I found dull and uninspired. But Simpsons roasting on an open fire is my example of a Christmas special done right. The family goes broke as a result of Mr. Burns refusing Homer and his fellow workers their Christmas bonus, and Marge's paranoia over Bart's tattoo, leading to the only option Homer has: work as an extra job as a department store Santa Claus. He tries extremely hard, not only to do quite a hard job, but to get the payments his family deserves. In the end, despite their troubles, they do experience a happy ending, and a fantastic start to one of the greatest shows of all time. Number 5. Homer's Odyssey. I'd say that Homer's Odyssey is the darkest episode of the season. Whereas Bart the Genius established Bart's character, the next episode focused more on Homer. Through the pilot episode, we know that Homer's workplace is a nuclear power plant, though his main job is not established until the end of this episode. Speaking of the power plant, it was a very cool idea to have Bart's field trip take place there. It's a great setup to Homer being canned, yet we do feel sorry for the guy, not only because of that, but afterwards he's being turned away from every other job he's attempting to apply for. And I speak as somebody who's experienced this sort of thing before. Understandably, because he's now unemployed, the family's finances are lower, and this leads to why I was expressing the darkness of this episode: Homer attempting suicide, which alas remains relevant in today's society. But it's good that Homer reconsiders it after saving his family from being run over by traffic. Otherwise, what's The Simpsons without him? It's also great that he's rehired at the plant. I mean, can you imagine him working at an entirely different place for the rest of the series? Well, sure, Peter Griffin may have, but this ain't Family Guy, you know. I should also talk about Mr. Burns' character. Even though we first see him in the pilot, this episode gives him much more of an establishment. And yes, Homer's Odyssey is quite well known from the animation era on Smithers. But we can forgive that, can't we? Number 4. The Telltale Head. The Telltale Head is a great way to introduce some of my favourite characters on the show, including Jimbo, Dolph, Kearney, and of course Apu, and even Krusty and Sideshow Bob, the latter two who I shall talk about later on. In the end, we know Bart's troublemaking schemes are usually playful and petty, but Jimbo and the others commit kind of more serious trouble. Bart would spray paint and write graffiti, while his new friends would sneak into cinemas and shoplift, or as Jimbo would put it through his famous phrase, four-finger discounts. Yet Bart expresses his concerns for such actions. It's very hard to make friends with people like those guys, and Bart does his very best, but then that backfires when he cuts the head of the statue of the town's founder, when it turns out the bullies were just winding him up. We know that Bart wants to be cool and do bad stuff sometimes, but he would never mean to harm the town that much. But that's not all I like about the episode. Homer's behaviour in church always cracks a smile to my face when he listens to the Super Bowl and a commentator is speaking at the same time as Reverend Lovejoy's sermon. The editing on that is so great. The way the commentator's words sort of match Lovejoy's lip movements, and I'll probably never get over Marge calling her kids to get their butts downstairs. Number 3, Krusty gets busted. Going back to what I said about the Telltale Head, that's when Krusty and Sideshow Bob, who are another two of my favourite characters, appear for the very first time, but their roles were quite small. Krusty Gets Busted, on the other hand, gives them more of an introduction. In this episode, we see Krusty really enjoying his job as a children's entertainer, though of course he's more cynical in later episodes, but that's another story. We do know some of his recurring character traits, such as his inability to read and the fact that all the obsession with comedy goes to his head. As for Sideshow Bob, good God, he is an incredibly awesome character and one of the greatest examples of a fictional villain. It's more than the design of the character. He's smart, he's resourceful and flexible, and the synopsis provides a great motive for why he would frame his own boss and a great setup for his recurring vengeance on Bart. In addition, I think Bob must have really worked well on disguising himself as Krusty. Extra credit I give would go to Chief Wiggum. Even though he was technically introduced in Homer's Odyssey, I think he gets a better role in this. In the earlier seasons, he takes his job seriously as a cop, but also has some negative traits relating to his work, i.e. when he arrests Krusty and is like, "You have the right to remain silent, anything you say, blah 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 blah." Of course, in recent years, some children's entertainers have been charged and or convicted, not just of armed robbery, but of sexual offences, i.e. Gary Glitter and Rolf Harris. In the end, we know that even though Krusty does have negative thoughts, he would never commit anything as serious as what we see. Or would we? Would he? Number 2, Barts the General. Another great episode that introduces another one of my favourite characters, that is Nelson Muntz. I have to admit, I often did like the nastier characters best. When we was kids, me and my brother saw shows such as Stingray, Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet, and my brother especially wanted the baddies to win. He often did feel disappointed that that wasn't usually the case. I suppose you could say that Nelson is a tertiary villain in the show. I mean, he has been, as a lot of people describe him, a notorious bully. Why tertiary? Because on many occasions has he been on good sides with Bart and or his other friends. And this episode demonstrates the harshness of physical bullying rather deeply. Notice how Bart takes a few punches from Nelson, and even the flash forwards daydreams Bart has are enough to make one's epidermis show. We're often encouraged to tell someone when we're being bullied. We get a scene with Milhouse persuading Bart to tell Skinner about Nelson, and even Marge suggests the same. Bart does try, though Skinner's too busy being a pushy principal. There's learning afoot, he's like. Though telling an adult on a bully doesn't always change what a bully does. Nelson still continues his duties. In fact, he's not just a bully to his other classmates, but he also holds authority to the two weasels, and even they're scared of him. Bart the General does have a good message, and that is to not be afraid to stand up to bullies, and Bart does exactly that to Nelson, and in a cool way too, with the help from Grandpa. Speaking of which, extra points to his password to Herman, who's like, "What's the password?" and Grandpa's like, "Let me in, you idiot!" I'm glad they introduced Nelson in this direction, and that they left his positive traits till near the episode's end. And I'm also glad they have him stay as an occasional bully, because otherwise, what kind of character do you suppose he would have been? All shows need conflict to keep audiences invested, and The Simpsons does it great. And number 1, The Call of the Simpsons. If you thought that I watched The Simpsons just for the comedy, you have a lot more to learn about me. Yes, The Call of the Simpsons does have some hilarious moments, but it's more to it than the comedy. In fact, I'm wondering if maybe this episode should have been the pilot. Yeah. After all, it does centre entirely on the titular family as a whole, and observes some of its recurring themes, i.e. their financial troubles, and the fact that they do indeed care for each other despite the dysfunctional issues. The Call of the Simpsons is what I also describe as an adventure story. It sees the titular family purchasing a low-quality camper van, the only one that Homer can afford to purchase, leading them to go on a camping adventure, only to lead to disaster. It sees the Simpsons in probably the most dangerous situation in the whole season. I'd probably say more risky than dangerous. When they dangle over the cliff, you do feel glad that they survive, but also quite sad for them when they lose their van. I mean, who can blame them for their brief mourning? That van, despite being the cheapest one Homer could have bought, must have still cost them quite a bit. The same could be said when Homer and Bart go over the waterfall, but relief happens when they're both alive. And did I mention Maggie being looked after by a bunch of bears? Imagine if your kids was in that situation, yet you'd be lucky if those bears behaved like the ones in this episode do with Maggie. The music is top notch, and I love how Homer's whistling to it during the trip, even though it's background music. It's not without its humour, i.e. Homer's failed tips on survival and how to hunt animals. The rabbit bit always cracks me up, and oh yes, when he's mistaken for Bigfoot. There's so much I love about The Call of the Simpsons that I feel I should quit rabbiting on about it now, but it's, in my opinion, the best episode of Season 1 ever. So, what do I think of Season 1? Well, I've always enjoyed it. I do admit it did have some hiccups with the animation techniques and that it improved in later seasons, but it's certainly not the worst from the classic era. It has some dark moments. That's what I love about it, but the better ones were yet to come. So that's my personal review on Season 1 and its episodes. Your list is probably different to mine, but do feel free to comment. Thanks very much for watching.